I had to watch the debate last night, and I don't know how many of you watched it. We'll try to give you some sense of things. You know, it reminded me of when there were so many Republican candidates in 2016 that they had to have like a main debate and then a kids' table debate. Remember, there was like a second night with another debate. You guys recall that? So this reminded me of that second night debate, where you feel like, God, none of these people feel like they really have a chance. They kind of are on their talking points all the time. Yeah. Tim Scott, I still don't get Tim Scott. I mean, Tim Scott really tried to, throw a couple of deep passes, and he just didn't have any oomph there. He tried to take on Nikki Haley. He tried to take on Ron DeSantis. He's an also-ran anyway, and they're all also-rans. Mike Pence tried to be a little assertive, with this tepid criticism of Donald Trump. Dude, your boss at the time, Donald Trump, tried to have you killed. And still the best you can do is some sort of tepid criticism of him? And then, of course, the only guy who really came after him, Trump that is, was Chris Christie. And Chris Christie even had a loaded line that just felt very inauthentic. Yeah. So we'll play you a couple of highlights. Tony, let's play a couple of highlights of the debate. And then I liked a little piece of that summary analysis from Major Garrett, and we'll do that also. But let's do these are pieces of the Republican debate from last night. GOP clown show without the head clown. Exactly, Russ. And that, of course, no, I'm so glad you say that, Russ, because that's indeed the case. Yeah. This whole thing lacks importance on some level because none of these people measure up to the guy who's the front runner, Trump. As troubled as he is, he's ahead by 50 points. He is the guy. None of these people, it's clear, and it must be clear to all of you by now, when you watch these people in the media age, everyone seems inauthentic, loaded with talking points, and ultimately just not up to the task of communicating whatever they have to communicate to the American public. And then the last thing I'll say, and then, Tony, I want you to run a little bit of this, is that they leave a lot of huge topics on the table. They talk about this country in ways as though that totally ignore what's going. The country is going to shut down in a couple of days, and that was just glossed over last night. I mean, there are crisis inflection moments going on right now. You have a growing armed population that's being exhorted to violence by the last president. Of course, that's not mentioned because it's Fox News and, it's the GOP, and he's the front runner. But as you ignore that, you ignore enormous issues in this country. Here's a little bit of the debate from last night.
Joe Biden should not be on the picket line. He should be on the southern border working to close our southern border because it is unsafe, wide open, and insecure.
Look, I do disagree with something Tim Scott just said. Joe Biden doesn't belong on a picket line. He belongs on the unemployment line. As President of the United States, I'll be standing with workers all across America, and I'll be standing for the right to work of every American to join a union or not join a union as they decide.
If the government shuts down, should voters blame populist Republicans?
Voters should blame everybody who's in Washington, D.C.
Where's Joe Biden? He's completely missing in action from leadership. And you know who else is missing in action? Donald Trump is missing in action. He should be on this stage tonight. He owes it to you to defend his record where they added $7.8 trillion to the debt.
And I want to look at that camera right now and tell you, Donald, I know you're watching. You can't help yourself. I know you're watching, okay? And you're not here tonight not because of polls and not because of your indictments. You're not here tonight because you're afraid of being on the stage and defending your record. You're ducking these things. And let me tell you what's going to happen. You keep doing that, no one up here is going to call you Donald Trump anymore. We're going to call you Donald Duck.
You have said slaves develop skills in spite of slavery, not because of it. But many are still hurt. For descendants of slaves, this is personal. What is your message to them?
So first of all, that's a hoax that was perpetrated by Kamala Harris. We are not going to be doing that. Second of all, that was written by descendants of slaves. These are great Black history scholars, so we need to stop playing these games.
There is not a redeeming quality in slavery. He and Kamala should have just taken the one sentence out.
I have a radical idea for the Republican Party. We need to win elections. And part of how we win elections is reaching the next generation of young Americans where they are. So when I get into office, I've been very clear. Kids under the age of 16 should not be using addictive social media.
This is infuriating because TikTok is one of the most dangerous social media apps that we could have. And what you've got, I honestly, every time I hear you, I feel a little bit dumber for what you say. You've gone and you've helped China make medicines in China, not America. You're now wanting kids to go and get on the social media that's dangerous for all of us. You went and you were in business with the Chinese that gave Hunter Biden $5 million. We can't trust you.
Polls don't elect presidents. Voters elect presidents. Right. And we're going to take the case to the people in these early states. We're going to do it in a state-by-state direction. And why? Because as Reagan said in his day, this is our time for choosing.
No, I mean, Reagan would be nowhere in step with these guys. I'll tell you one moment where you really would notice that Reagan's not in step. And I'll give Fox News credit for asking this question. They were at the Reagan Library, and they mentioned the amnesty that Reagan gave 3 million undocumented immigrants. And that is something that is too big a pill for anybody on stage to choke down. I mean, now you have this nativism that has completely taken over the GOP. So there are parts of the GOP, I think, that would be unrecognizable to Ronald Reagan. They'd throw him out today. You know, I think there's a lot awful about Ronald Reagan. So, but be that as it may, it was a weird backdrop against which all of these loaded talking points were being uncorked. Nikki Haley had a good night, but not the kind of night where she's going to be vaulted to number one. Vivek so clearly had focus grouped or had spoken to campaign managers to the point that he got that everybody thinks he's this, automaton, robotic, arrogant, essentially pompous pharma bro. And so he did you notice how he tried to soften himself last night? He acknowledged, people think I'm a know-it-all or that I think I'm a know-it-all. I'm not. I'd have people in my administration who know more than I do. That was deliberate. That was an attempt to connect with the American people. And by the way, that is what you need to do. But all of them are huffing and puffing compared to the main dude. And, the main dude who is a tyrant in waiting. Buck says, I'm pretty sure Ramaswamy tried to sell me a timeshare.
He does have that air about him, doesn't he?
Does he ever? Does he ever? You really feel you're getting, you're checking your wallet. That stuff where you're, smile big, unflappable, keep talking, that works in that world of Silicon Valley. And it also works, and look, you've got to have something behind it, but it works in that world that he comes from, the entrepreneurial world. I'll give him credit for being a successful entrepreneur, but I will not give him credit for being thoughtful or reflective in any of his policies in this when it comes to this country. Now, play a little bit of Garrett, if you will, Tony, and then I want to give you some last-minute thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Got a new look these days, Terry Sullivan, in communications described as
breakout moment when Trump isn't there is an impossible.
That's good. Go from
there. So
there.
look, the idea of a breakout moment when Trump isn't there is an impossibility. It just doesn't happen. And even though there were some choice words, some criticisms of the former president at the margin, no one really took him on. If you'd watched that debate last night, you'd think the worst thing that former President Trump had done to America was not attend that debate. I'd say there's a large swath of America that would think there are other things you might want to insert there.
Like,
well, January 6th would be one. what he said last week about reviving a 1798 law. Let me repeat, a 1798 law, the Enemies Act, to begin the deportation of any non-citizen aged 14 or older suspected of any criminal activity.
What he said about
Mass
Mark
deportations. No one even brought that up in the immigration context.
What he said about
Mark
Milley.
Milley,
Yeah.
calling for or implying that it would be necessary to kill a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Nobody brought that up either. So in that sense, breakout, if you're not really going to take him on, you're not breaking out.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
There
Thank
was
you.
an element of
That's fine. That was really some good specifics on what I said overall, which is that they just glossed over, everything going on. You've got this guy who's this embattled figure. He leads the GOP, and no one is calling him out in any kind of substantial way. Bruni had some great stuff on this in the New York Times. And I'll just read you a couple of paragraphs. I think he's so good. And he's such a great writer. Trump has a mammoth lead over all of them, and there's no sign that it's shrinking. He's skating to the party's presidential nomination. Along the way, he's doing quadruple axles of madness, triple toe loops of provocation. He's fantasizing about executing a respected general, and he's fetishizing firearms. His words come close to incitements of violence. He's not sorry for the January 6th riots. To my ears, he'd like more where that came from.
Yep.
But did any of the 7 candidates on stage at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California, talk about that? Nope. Mike Pence criticized Trump for wanting to consolidate too much power in Washington, D.C. DeSantis argued that Trump, if elected president again, could serve only 1 term, while DeSantis, a newcomer to the White House, could serve 2. Christie, the bravest of a timid bunch, gave eloquent voice to how profoundly Trump had divided the country, pitting friend against friend and relative against relative. And while that's sadly true, that's also beside the point. The point is that Trump has zero respect for democracy and aspirations for autocracy. The point is that he keeps scaling new pinnacles of unhinged. The point is that he needs to win the presidency so that he doesn't have to worry about living out his days where he belongs, behind bars. And perhaps the only shot that any of those 7 candidates has to stop him and prevent the irreversible damage that he'd do to the United States with 4 more years is to call a tyrant, a liar, an arsonist, an arsonist. None of them did.
Who wrote that? That's so good.
That's Frank Bruni. He's brilliant, and he writes. Isn't he such a great writer?
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. That's in the New York Times, but it goes on and on and on. I mean, it was just literally, I had the thought about this as they were squabbling about stuff, and Tim Scott served up that thing about the drapes that Nikki Haley essentially had spent all this money. He's trying to talk about it, I think, in the context of sort of fiscal responsibility. And Bruni referenced it. Instead of taking Trump sufficiently to task, instead of explaining in full why just about any one of them would be preferable to the madman of Mar-a-Lago, Nikki Haley and Tim Scott quarreled about drapes. Yes, drapes. He said she squandered $50,000 of federal money on them when she was the United Nations ambassador. She said she didn't, and they both grew very exercised about it. Where was that passion on the subject of Trump? Instead of savaging him, the 7 candidates tore into one another, seemingly vying not to catch up to Trump, but to be declared the number 1 alternative, like a beauty pageant runner-up poised to fulfill the winner's duties and wear the winner's tiara should the need arise. Just brilliant. Again, these are all also-rans. It felt to me like the kids' table. It felt like nobody has the stuff to take on the former president.
And if they did have the stuff, you were never going to get to hear it anyway.
It was a ridiculous debate format. There is when you have 8 people on stage, all of whom are vying for time and a moment, it's an almost impossible situation. Everybody gets a minute, and then if you're mentioned, these are the rules. If you're mentioned, you get 15 seconds to rebut. I mean, again, great. You can set your watch on this, but you're not really getting anything. This is what I say all the time about these things. These are shows. It's a show. In a way, I don't blame these people for coming with preloaded talking points. What I blame them for is having these talking points that are essentially tepid. They don't really cut through, and they're not executed well. Even Christie, who's probably the most media friendly, I mean, Vivek comes off as smarmy, right? And too slick. Christie comes off at least as, because he's been on ABC's This Week for so long, he's very good with media. Even his preloaded stuff just seems so like the duck. They're not going to call you Donald Trump anymore. We're going to start calling you Donald Duck. Really, dude? That was the big wave cresting? I thought it was pretty embarrassing. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.